My name is Mason. I just turned 34 last month. For years, I quietly paid the mortgage on my parents' house, even after they left everything to my younger brother Derek in their will. Not a single thank you from either of them. When I finally stopped payments, my phone stayed silent for exactly 30 days. Then came a text from Mom, mortgage due. My calm reply changed everything. If you want to know what family betrayal really feels like, stick around. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and prepare yourself for a story about standing up for yourself. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Our house wasn't anything special, but it was in a good school district, which my parents never let me forget was the reason they stretched their finances to buy it. Dad worked as a structural engineer for a construction company, often putting in 60-hour weeks during the summer building season. Mom taught third grade at the elementary school just 3 blocks from our house, which meant she could keep tabs on me even when I wasn't in her class. From my earliest memories, there was always this unspoken tension between me and my parents. Nothing dramatic or abusive, just this constant pressure to achieve, to excel, to justify their investment in me. Every report card became a referendum on my worth. An A- wasn't celebrated. It was questioned. What happened to the other points, Dad would ask, frowning at the paper like I had personally insulted him. Then Derek came along when I was 5. From the beginning, it was clear he operated under a different set of rules. Where I was expected to be independent, he was coddled. Where I faced consequences, he received second chances, and third chances, and fourth. By the time I was 12, I was packing my own lunches and setting my alarm clock. Derek at 7 still had Mom cutting the crusts off his sandwiches and tucking him in at night. I'm not saying he was spoiled exactly, but there was definitely a double standard. One memory stands out vividly. When I turned 16, I wanted a laptop for school. My parents told me it was an unnecessary expense and that I could use the family desktop computer in the living room. So I got a job bagging groceries at the local supermarket, saving every penny for 4 months, until I had enough for a basic model. The very same year, Derek turned 11 and received the latest PlayStation with 6 games for his birthday. When I pointed out the inconsistency, Mom said Derek needs more encouragement with his studies. The games are incentives. Never mind that Derek's idea of studying was opening a textbook while playing those games. The pattern continued through high school. I maintained a 4-point GPA while working 20 hours a week and playing baseball. Derek barely passed his classes, quit every extracurricular activity he started, but still somehow got a car for his 15th birthday. Not even his 16th birthday, his 15th, so it would be ready for him when he got his license. College was where the disparity became impossible to ignore. I applied to 8 schools and got accepted to 6, including Northwestern and University of Michigan. I chose University of Illinois because they offered me a partial scholarship. Even with that, my parents informed me they could only contribute about $5,000 toward my education each year. We've been saving, but with the housing market downturn, we just don't have what we thought we would, Dad explained, looking genuinely regretful. I understood. I took out loans, worked part-time at the campus IT help desk, and graduated with about $70,000 in debt. 4 years later, when Derek went to college, the story changed dramatically. He got into Southern Illinois University with grades that could generously be described as mediocre. Suddenly, my parents had enough money to pay his full tuition, buy him a new laptop, furnish his apartment, and give him a monthly allowance. When I asked Mom about this during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, she said, "Your brother isn't as resourceful as you are, Mason. He needs more support to succeed." That phrase became a recurring theme in our family dynamic. I was resourceful and independent and capable, all code words for "we don't need to help you." Derek was sensitive and still finding his way, and needs structure, all euphemisms for "we'll keep supporting him indefinitely." Despite all this, I maintained a relationship with my parents. It wasn't close, but it was civil. Sunday dinners once a month when I was in town. Phone calls on birthdays and holidays. I told myself that family was family, and that holding grudges would only hurt me in the long run. What I didn't realize then was how these early dynamics would set the stage for much bigger disappointments down the road. The small inequities of childhood were just rehearsals for the main performance that would come after my father's health began to fail. But I'm getting ahead of myself. By my late 20s, I had established a life independent from my family. I had friends who valued me, colleagues who respected me, and a growing sense that perhaps the distance between me and my parents wasn't entirely a bad thing. Still, there was always that lingering hope that someday they would see me clearly and acknowledge what I had accomplished on my own. That hope kept me tethered to them, responding to their occasional requests for help, showing up for family functions, and maintaining the facade that everything was normal. In reality, I was the family member they called when they needed something practical done, while Derek remained the emotional center of their world. I sometimes wonder if things would have turned out differently had I confronted them earlier about this imbalance. But like many children who grow up in subtly dysfunctional families, I had normalized the abnormal. It would take a much more dramatic event to finally open my eyes to the reality of my position in the family hierarchy. After graduating from college with my IT degree and that mountain of debt, I moved back to Chicago and took the first job I could find, a technical support position at a medium-sized software company. The pay was barely enough to cover my student loan payments and a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that real estate agents optimistically called transitional. My first desk was in a windowless room that had previously been a storage closet. The air conditioning vents didn't quite reach it, so summers were spent sweating through my button-up shirts while talking customers through turning their computers off and on again. But it was a foot in the door of the tech industry, and I was determined to climb. Within a year, I had learned enough about the company's software to move from technical support to quality assurance. The raise was modest, but the experience was valuable. I started taking online courses at night to learn programming languages that would make me more marketable. My social life consisted of ramen noodles, energy drinks, and the glow of my computer screen until 2 in the morning. Derek, meanwhile, had switched majors 3 times and was on the 5-year plan at Southern Illinois. My parents never mentioned any concern about this extended timeline or additional expense. When I visited during Christmas, Derek would regale everyone with stories of fraternity parties and spring break trips to Florida, all funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. By year 3 in my career, I had moved to a small software development firm as a junior developer. The pay bump allowed me to move to a slightly better apartment and accelerate my student loan payments. I was determined to be debt-free by 30, a goal that required strict budgeting and few luxuries. At 27, I landed a position as a project manager at a growing tech company that specialized in healthcare software. The salary was finally commensurate with my experience and education, and I began to see light at the end of the financial tunnel. That same year, Derek graduated and moved back home temporarily while he figured things out. His figuring things out consisted mainly of sleeping until noon and half-heartedly applying for jobs that he was either underqualified for or had no real interest in. When I suggested he might start with something entry-level just to build experience, he scoffed. "I didn't get a business degree to answer phones, Mason." I bit my tongue, remembering all too well my own time in the windowless closet doing exactly that. After 8 years of disciplined payments and minimal living expenses, I finally paid off my student loans. The feeling of freedom was indescribable. For the first time in my adult life, my paycheck was truly mine. I celebrated by taking myself out for a steak dinner and buying a new mattress, the kind with memory foam that came delivered in a box. The following year, at 31, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small condo in Logan Square. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom with a galley kitchen and a balcony barely big enough for a chair, but it was mine. The pride I felt signing those mortgage papers is something I'll never forget. No one had helped me. No one had co-signed or gifted me money or connected me with a special deal. I had done it entirely on my own merit and discipline. That same month, I received a call from Mom. Dad had been having some health issues and had decided to take early retirement. Their income would be significantly reduced, and they were worried about making ends meet. The company pension wasn't as substantial as they had hoped, and they had dipped into their savings during Derek's extended college stay and subsequent unemployment. "We're not asking for handouts." Mom assured me, though, that was exactly what she was about to do. "Just a little help with the mortgage until we get things figured out, just temporarily." Despite our complicated history, they were still my parents. I agreed to contribute $1,000 a month toward their mortgage payment. It was a significant amount for me, especially with my own new mortgage, but I rationalized that it was the right thing to do. Family helps family, even when the help has historically flowed in one direction. What was supposed to be temporary assistance quickly became a regular expectation. Months passed, then a year, then two. Derek had finally found a job as a sales representative for a liquor distributor, a position that seemingly involved more drinking than selling. He lived in the basement of our parents' house, ostensibly saving money, though his new car and frequent weekend trips suggested otherwise. Not once during this time did he offer to contribute to the household expenses. Not once did my parents suggest he should. The unspoken understanding was that Mason would handle the practical matters. Mason was good with money. Mason was responsible. Over 3 years, I contributed more than $40,000 to my parents' household. I delayed retirement contributions, put off home improvements, and rarely took vacations. Meanwhile, my social media feeds filled with photos of Derek at concerts, sporting events, and bars, always smiling, always carefree. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was building good karma. I told myself that surely when it came time for my parents to consider their legacy, they would remember who had been there for them in practical ways, who had sacrificed, who had stepped up. I couldn't have been more wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. Mom's voice trembled as she told me Dad had suffered a stroke. He was stable but hospitalized, and the prognosis was uncertain. I immediately took emergency leave from work and drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Dad looked small in the hospital bed tubes and wires, connecting him to machines that beeped and hummed, in a rhythm that seemed both reassuring and ominous. The left side of his face drooped slightly, and his left arm lay motionless on the white sheet. The doctor explained that while the stroke was moderate in severity, recovery would be a long road involving extensive physical therapy. Mom sat beside him, clutching his right hand, looking older than her 66 years. When she saw me, relief washed over her face. "Oh, Mason, thank goodness you're here. I don't know what to do about all the paperwork, and the insurance forms are so confusing." I spent the next several hours navigating the labyrinthine healthcare system, talking to insurance representatives, filling out forms, and trying to understand what would be covered and what wouldn't. It became clear that even with Medicare, there would be significant out-of-pocket expenses. "Where's Derek?" I asked, eventually noticing my brother's absence. "He's at work," Mom said defensively. "He can't just drop everything. His boss isn't as understanding as yours." I swallowed the retort that rose to my lips. My boss wasn't understanding. I had accrued personal days through years of rarely taking time off. But arguing wouldn't help Dad, so I focused on what needed to be done. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. I would work remotely during the day from my parents' house, then drive Mom to the hospital in the evenings. Derek would occasionally show up for brief visits, usually around dinner time, staying just long enough to tell Dad about his day before heading out to meet friends or his girlfriend. Dad was eventually discharged to a rehabilitation facility where he would spend 6 weeks relearning how to walk, dress himself, and perform basic daily tasks. The facility was 40 minutes from my parents' house, but over an hour from mine, making daily visits logistically challenging. Without discussing it, it was assumed I would handle the transportation, the coordination with therapists, and the ongoing insurance battles. I reduced my hours at work, taking a corresponding cut in pay. The company was supportive but had limits to their flexibility. My own mortgage and bills still needed to be paid, and now I was spending additional money on gas, hospital parking, and takeout meals eaten on the go. 2 months into Dad's recovery, Mom received a diagnosis of her own congestive heart failure. Not immediately life-threatening if properly managed, but serious enough to require medication, dietary changes, and regular medical supervision. The stress of Dad's condition had likely exacerbated her underlying heart issues. Now I was coordinating care for both parents, shuttling between different medical facilities, picking up prescriptions, and trying to maintain some semblance of my own life. Derek's contribution remained minimal, limited to occasional grocery runs and brief hospital visits, always with a ready excuse about work obligations or prior commitments. During one particularly exhausting week, Mom mentioned that she and Dad were thinking about updating their will. "With everything going on, we want to make sure our affairs are in order," she explained. "Could you help us find a good estate attorney?" I researched options and scheduled an appointment with a highly rated firm specializing in elder law and estate planning. I drove my parents to the initial consultation, where the attorney explained the process and the various options available to them. When it came time to discuss the specifics of their assets and intentions, the attorney asked if I would mind stepping out of the room to allow my parents' privacy. I thought nothing of it at the time, assuming it was standard procedure to ensure clients could speak freely. As the weeks passed, Dad's condition improved incrementally. He regained some mobility in his left side and was able to speak more clearly, though he tired easily and became frustrated with his limitations. Mom's health stabilized with medication, but she remained fragile both physically and emotionally. The financial strain on the household intensified. Medical bills accumulated despite insurance coverage. I increased my monthly contribution to $1,500, cutting back on my own expenses to make it possible. I convinced myself it was temporary, that once Dad was better, things would return to normal. Then came another setback. Dad developed pneumonia and was readmitted to the hospital. His weakened condition made the infection particularly dangerous, and for a few terrifying days we weren't sure he would survive. He rallied briefly, then declined again. The doctors prepared us for the possibility that he might not recover this time. Derek finally showed up consistently during this crisis, though his presence sometimes created more stress than support. He would question the doctor's decisions, suggest alternative treatments he'd read about online, and complain about the quality of care, all without offering to actually do anything practical to help. Dad passed away peacefully on a Sunday morning in early spring. Mom and I were at his bedside. Derek arrived 20 minutes after the nurse pronounced time of death. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, notification calls, and paperwork. I handled most of it, operating on autopilot grief, temporarily suspended in favor of practical necessities. The funeral was well attended. Dad had been respected in his profession and had maintained friendships going back to his college days. Derek gave an emotional eulogy that painted a picture of family harmony and shared adventures that seemed foreign to my experience. I chose not to speak, feeling that anything I said would either be dishonest or inappropriately revealing. After the service, Derek hugged Mom for a long time, making a show of his grief, then announced he needed to get back to his girlfriend's place to process everything. He wouldn't be staying to help with the countless tasks that follow a death. No surprise there. That night alone in my condo, the reality of Dad's death finally hit me. Despite our complicated relationship, he had been a constant in my life, a figure I both sought approval from and rebelled against. Now he was gone, and I would never have the opportunity to resolve our unspoken tensions or hear him say he was proud of me. I allowed myself one night of grief before returning to my parents' house the next day to help Mom sort through Dad's belongings and begin the process of settling his estate. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week. Despite everything, I still harbored hope that Dad had recognized my contributions and commitment in his final arrangements. That hope would soon be extinguished in the most painful way possible. The reading of the will took place in the conference room of the law firm I had researched and recommended. The irony of this detail would not escape me later. The space was tastefully decorated in that generic professional way. Lawyers' offices tend to be dark wood furniture, to landscape paintings in muted colors, leather-bound books on shelves that looked like they had never been opened. Mom sat with uncharacteristic stillness, hands folded in her lap, wedding ring still on her finger. Derek slouched in his chair, scrolling through his phone until the attorney cleared his throat pointedly. I sat straight, hands resting on the table, mentally prepared for the formalities of asset division and executor responsibilities that I assumed would fall to me. Mr. Patterson, the attorney, adjusted his glasses and began reading the standard legal preamble establishing that this was indeed the last will and testament of Robert James Wilson, being of sound mind, etc. I half listened, my thoughts drifting to the pile of work emails accumulating during my absence and the growing list of tasks I needed to handle for Mom. Now, regarding the distribution of assets, Mr. Patterson continued, bringing my attention back to the present. To my son, Mason Alexander Wilson, I leave my Omega wristwatch, which was given to me by my own father, and the accompanying letter in the envelope marked with his name. I blinked, waiting for the next item. Surely there would be more. To my wife, Margaret Ellen Wilson, I leave our joint investment account at Fidelity Investments, the balance of our joint checking and savings accounts, and all personal items not specifically designated elsewhere in this document. I shifted in my seat, a faint unease beginning to form. To my son, Derek James Wilson, I leave our family home at 1847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and belongings therein, not otherwise specified, as well as my entire stock portfolio held at Charles Schwab, and my collection of rare coins located in the safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 247. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, certain I had misheard or that there was more to come. There had to be more. This concludes the distribution of assets, Mr. Patterson said, glancing up from the document. The remainder of the will contains standard legal provisions regarding the settlement of debts and the appointment of Margaret Wilson as executor with Derek Wilson as successor executor should she be unable to serve. I'm sorry, I interrupted, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Could you repeat the asset distribution? I think I might have missed something. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable but obliged, repeating the exact same provisions. The family home worth approximately $400,000 in the current market. The stock portfolio, which I knew contained blue-chip investments accumulated over 30 years, conservatively worth at least $250,000. The coin collection, a hobby of Dad's that had become surprisingly valuable over time, worth perhaps $50,000. All of it, every significant asset, had been left to Derek. My inheritance consisted of a 50-year-old watch that Dad rarely wore and a letter. I looked at Mom, searching for some sign of surprise or discomfort, some indication that this outcome was unexpected to her as well. Her expression remained neutral, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "This can't be right," I said, hearing the tremor in my voice. "There must be some mistake." "I assure you, Mr. Wilson, this is the document your parents signed 3 months ago," Mr. Patterson replied. "They were both deemed competent by 2 witnesses, and everything is legally binding." "But I've been paying the mortgage," I said, the words tumbling out before I could consider their appropriateness. "I've been supporting them financially for years. I took care of Dad through his illness. I drove Mom to all her appointments. I've put my life on hold." Derek finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sounds like you did that by choice, bro. Nobody forced you." I stared at him, this stranger who shared my blood, but apparently none of my values. "You knew about this," I said, realization dawning. "You've known all along." He shrugged, neither confirming nor denying, but his lack of surprise told me everything I needed to know. "Mason," Mom said, finally speaking, her voice gentle but with an undercurrent of steel. "Your father and I discussed this at length. We felt it was the fairest way to handle things. You've always been the strong one, the independent one. Derek needs more security than you do." The familiar refrain trotted out once again to justify the unjustifiable. I felt something break inside me, some last thread of hope that had stubbornly persisted despite years of evidence to the contrary. "May I have the letter, please?" I asked Mr. Patterson, my voice unnaturally calm. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I opened it carefully, aware of 3 pairs of eyes watching me. The letter was brief, just a few paragraphs. Dad acknowledged my help during his illness and expressed appreciation for my responsible nature. He explained that the decision to leave the bulk of the estate to Derek was based on his belief that I was better equipped to succeed independently, while Derek needed the security of family assets to find his footing in life. The final paragraph was the most revealing. "You've always been strong, Mason, sometimes too strong for your own good. You never seem to need us the way Derek does. We hope you understand that our decision is based on need, not on love or appreciation." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. The watch sat in a small box on the table, its face gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I left it where it was. "There's one more thing you should know, Mason," Mr. Patterson said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "The mortgage on your parents' home, on Derek's home now, is still outstanding. About $180,000 remains on the loan." And I prompted, though I suspected what was coming. "According to our records and the bank statements your mother provided, you've been making those payments for some time." I want to clarify that with the transfer of ownership to Derek, that responsibility legally shifts to him unless you have some other arrangement. I looked at Mom, then at Derek. Neither seemed concerned by this revelation. In fact, there was an expectant quality to their silence, as if they were waiting for me to volunteer continued financial support, despite everything that had just transpired. "I see," was all I said, rising from my chair. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Patterson. If there's nothing else requiring my signature today, I'll be going." The attorney confirmed there was nothing further needed from me. I nodded once to Mom, ignored Derek completely, and walked out of the office into the bright spring afternoon, feeling as if I had aged a decade in a single hour. The betrayal was complete and unambiguous. Years of support, both emotional and financial, had counted for nothing. Worse than nothing, they had perhaps been taken as evidence that I didn't need or deserve consideration when it came to my parents' legacy. As I drove home, my father's words echoed in my mind. "We hope you understand that our decision is based on need, not on love or appreciation." What they had failed to understand was that everyone needs love and appreciation, even the strong ones, especially the strong ones. The drive back to my condo passed in a blur. Traffic lights, other cars, pedestrians all seemed distant and irrelevant, like props in a play I was no longer interested in watching. I parked in my designated spot, walked up the 3 flights of stairs rather than taking the elevator, and entered my home in a state of emotional numbness. Everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning, yet nothing felt the same. The books on my shelves, the coffee mug in the sink, the throw blanket draped over my couch, all symbols of a life I had built independently, a life that my parents had effectively deemed less worthy of support or acknowledgement than my brothers. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my suit from the meeting, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The anger came first, hot and clarifying. How dare they? After everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, how could they dismiss me so completely? Then came the hurt, deeper and more devastating than the anger. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an oversight. This was a deliberate choice made with full awareness of the message it would send. They had valued Derek's dependence over my independence, his needs over my contributions. I must have sat there for hours, cycling through rage and grief and disbelief. The sun set, casting long shadows across my bedroom floor, then disappeared entirely, leaving me in darkness. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The darkness suited my mood. Around midnight, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Trevor, my closest friend since college, checking in after not hearing from me all day. I had forgotten we were supposed to meet for drinks after what I had naively expected to be a straightforward will reading. I texted back a brief explanation, expecting sympathy but not advice. Trevor's response was immediate and unequivocal. "Dude, cut them off. All of them. They've been using you for years." The bluntness of his assessment startled me. Had they been using me, I had always framed my support as a choice I was making, a responsibility I was accepting. But looking back, there had been an expectation that I would help, an assumption that Mason would handle things, because that's what Mason did. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I needed space to think, to process, to decide what came next. Around noon, my colleague Samantha called, concerned by my absence. Samantha and I had started at the company around the same time and had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and occasional happy hour commiserations. I found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out in a disorganized jumble of facts and feelings. She listened without interruption, making only occasional sounds of acknowledgement or disbelief. "That's seriously messed up," she said when I finally ran out of words. "But Mason, have you actually told your mom how you feel about this? Really told her, not just hinted or assumed she should know?" I had to admit I hadn't. In the shock of the moment, I had retreated rather than confronted. "Maybe start there," Samantha suggested. "At least give her a chance to explain. And if her explanation sucks, then you can decide what boundaries you need to set going forward." It was reasonable advice, mature advice, the kind of measured response I would typically value. But there was a part of me that resisted the idea of having to explain why I felt betrayed, as if the facts themselves weren't glaringly obvious. Nevertheless, I called Mom that afternoon. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying. She expressed surprise at my reaction, claiming they thought I would be fine with the arrangement given my successful career and independent lifestyle. "We just thought Derek needed the security more than you did," she repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it reasonable. "And what about what I might have wanted?" I asked. "Did that factor into your decision at all?" "Mason, don't be childish," she said, her tone shifting from conciliatory to reproving. "This isn't about wants, it's about needs. You need to be more mature about this." The conversation deteriorated from there. My attempts to express hurt were met with deflection or dismissal. When I brought up the years of financial support I had provided, she accused me of keeping score and putting a price tag on family help. We ended the call with nothing resolved. Mom maintained that I was overreacting while I felt even more certain that a fundamental injustice had occurred. My next step was to try reaching Derek, though I had few expectations of a productive conversation. As predicted, he didn't answer my calls. I left a voicemail asking him to contact me regarding the mortgage payments and other practical matters that needed to be addressed now that ownership of the house had transferred to him. 3 days passed with no response. I tried again this time, sending a text message directly addressing the issue. "Now that you own the house, we need to discuss the mortgage payments I've been making. Please call me." His response came hours later. "Don't worry about it, bro. Nothing has to change." The audacity was breathtaking. "Nothing has to change" meant that I should continue paying for a house that now legally belonged to him, a house I would never own, any part of a house that represented the clearest possible statement of my parents' priorities. I decided to gather more information before making my next move. I contacted the mortgage company, directly identifying myself as the person who had been making payments on the loan for the past 3 years. I inquired about the current balance, monthly payment amount, and what would happen if payments stopped. The representative explained that the loan was still in my parents' names, as the property transfer after Dad's death hadn't yet been recorded with the mortgage company. Once that happened, Derek would need to either assume the loan or refinance. In the meantime, the bank didn't care who made the payments as long as they were made. If payments stopped, the normal delinquency process would begin, potentially leading to foreclosure after several months of non-payment. Armed with this information, I spent the next few days considering my options. Trevor's advice to cut them off echoed in my mind, as did Samantha's more measured suggestion to establish clear boundaries. I thought about my own financial situation. The retirement contributions I had delayed, the home improvements I had postponed, all to help my parents maintain their lifestyle and keep their house a house that would never be mine. The monthly mortgage payment was due in 1 week. I had set up an automatic transfer from my account to cover it, a transfer I could cancel with a few clicks. It would be so easy to just let it go through, to continue the pattern of support that had become second nature over the years, the path of least resistance. But something had changed in me. The revelation of the will had crystallized years of small inequities into one undeniable truth. My parents and brother saw my support as an entitlement, not a gift. They expected me to continue carrying their burdens while receiving nothing in return, not even the basic acknowledgement of equal treatment in my parents' final wishes. I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic transfer. Then I sent a brief factual email to Mom and Derek, copying the mortgage company. This email serves as notification that I will no longer be making payments toward the mortgage at 1847 Oakwood Drive. The next payment is due on the 15th. Please make arrangements accordingly. I didn't offer explanations or justifications. I didn't express anger or hurt. I simply stated the facts and closed my laptop, feeling a curious mix of anxiety and relief. For the first time in years, I had prioritized my own needs over the expectations of my family. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That night I slept more soundly than I had since before Dad's stroke. The decision had been made, the action taken. Whatever came next, I would face it, knowing I had finally stood up for myself in a clear and unambiguous way. 30 days passed with no communication from either Mom or Derek. Not a call, not a text, not an email. The silence was both unnerving and confirming. It told me everything I needed to know about the transactional nature of our relationship. Without my financial contribution, I apparently wasn't worth contacting. During that month, I redirected the money I would have sent for the mortgage into my own retirement account. I scheduled the home repairs I had been postponing: a new water heater, fixing the leaky bathroom faucet, replacing the aging refrigerator. Small improvements, but each one a statement that my own home and future mattered. I threw myself into work, taking on an additional project that came with potential for promotion. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the intensive caregiving period. I started jogging again, a hobby I had abandoned when my free time evaporated. Slowly, I began rebuilding the life I had put on hold. Then, exactly 31 days after my email about the mortgage, my phone lit up with a text from Mom: mortgage payment due, bank called with late notice. Please handle ASAP. No hello. No how are you. No acknowledgement of the email I had sent or the month of silence. Just an assumption, or perhaps a demand, that I would continue my financial support despite everything that had transpired. I stared at the message for a long time, considering my response. The old Mason would have apologized, made excuses, and rushed to fix the problem. The new Mason, the one who had spent a month reclaiming his life and dignity, typed, "The house belongs to Derek now, as per Dad's will. The mortgage is his responsibility." Simple, factual, unapologetic. Mom's response came quickly. "Don't be difficult, Mason. You know your brother can't afford the payments right now. This is still a family matter." I replied, "It stopped being a family matter when you and Dad decided to leave everything to Derek. I've supported you both for years while building my own life. That ends now." Then I silenced my phone and went for a run, pushing myself harder than usual, using the physical exertion to process the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. By the time I returned home, sweaty and exhausted, my phone showed 6 missed calls, 3 from Mom, 2 from Derek, and 1 from an unknown number. I listened to the voicemails in order. Mom's messages escalated from persuasive to angry to tearful, culminating in an accusation that I was abandoning the family and dishonoring your father's memory. Derek's messages were more direct, calling me selfish and threatening vague consequences if I didn't step up. The unknown number turned out to be the mortgage company calling to verify my email about ceasing payments. I returned only the mortgage company's call, confirming that I was no longer responsible for or involved with the loan. The representative noted this in their system and suggested that the primary borrowers contact them directly to discuss options if they were having difficulty making payments. Later that evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mom and Derek standing there, both wearing expressions that mixed anger and desperation. I hadn't seen either of them in person since the reading of the will. "May we come in?" Mom asked, her tone suggesting it wasn't really a question. I stepped aside silently, allowing them into my condo. We stood awkwardly in my small living room, none of us making a move to sit down. "This has gone far enough," Mason, Mom began. "I understand you're upset about the will, but punishing us financially isn't going to change anything." "I'm not punishing anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm simply aligning my financial responsibilities with the reality of the situation. Derek owns the house now. It's his asset, his responsibility." "You know I can't afford the payments," Derek interjected, his face flushed. "I'm still establishing my career. My commission checks aren't consistent yet." "You're 34, I pointed out. "The same age I was when I started paying for a house I didn't own and would never inherit. Funny how that works." "This isn't a game," Mason, Mom said sharply. "We could lose the house. Is that what you want? For your mother to be homeless?" "You wouldn't be homeless," I replied, maintaining my composure. "You have options. You could sell the house and buy something more affordable. Derek could get a second job or a roommate to help with expenses. You could sell some of the stocks Dad left him. There are many solutions that don't involve me continuing to pay for someone else's asset." "Those are all your father's stocks," Mom exclaimed, as if I had suggested selling a family heirloom. "Yes," I agreed. "The stocks he chose to leave entirely to Derek, just like the house. Assets come with responsibilities. That's how ownership works." Derek paced my small living room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I can't believe you're doing this to us. After everything Mom and Dad did for you." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "What exactly did they do for me, Derek? They didn't pay for my education. They didn't help me buy my home. They didn't support me during hard times. In fact, it's been entirely the opposite. I supported them financially and practically for years, and in return they left me a watch. They raised you, Mom countered. They gave you a good home, a good education. They did the bare minimum that parents are supposed to do, I replied. And they did significantly more than that for Derek. I don't resent the differential treatment of our childhoods anymore, Mom, but I do resent the expectation that I would continue to support a system that explicitly excludes me from its benefits. The conversation circled for nearly an hour, with Mom and Derek alternating between guilt trips, accusations, and occasionally, when those tactics failed, attempts at compromise that still fundamentally relied on me continuing to pay for the house. I remained firm. The mortgage was now Derek's responsibility. If he couldn't afford it, he needed to make different choices, just as I had made choices and sacrifices throughout my adult life. Finally, when it became clear that I wouldn't budge, Mom suggested reluctantly that perhaps they could sell some of the stocks to catch up on the mortgage payments and refinance the loan to lower the monthly amount. That sounds like a reasonable approach, I said, relieved that they were finally accepting reality. I just don't understand why you're being so cold about this, Derek said, shaking his head. This isn't the brother I know. You're right, I agreed. I'm not the same person who would sacrifice his own well-being to prop up an unfair system. That person is gone. This is the brother who respects himself enough to set boundaries. They left shortly after Mom teary-eyed, and Derek sullenly silent. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The confrontation had been difficult but necessary. For the first time in my adult life, I had clearly articulated my worth and my limits to my family, and I had done so without rage or recrimination, just calm certainty. Whether they understood or accepted my position remained to be seen, but I realized with some surprise that their understanding was no longer essential to my peace of mind. I had spoken my truth. I had defended my boundaries. That was enough. 3 months passed with minimal contact from my family. Occasional text messages from Mom, usually updates about her health or pointed comments about struggling to make ends meet, but nothing requiring a substantive response from me. Derek maintained radio silence, apparently still nursing his resentment over my refusal to continue financing his inheritance. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that they had indeed sold some of the stocks to catch up on the mortgage payments, but ultimately decided that maintaining the house was too expensive. They listed it for sale in late summer, accepting an offer slightly below asking price, but enough to pay off the remaining mortgage and provide a modest cushion. Mom moved in with Derek and his girlfriend, taking the spare bedroom in their rented apartment. According to neighborhood gossip, Derek had finally secured a more stable position, with a pharmaceutical sales company, motivated perhaps by the sudden responsibility of supporting his mother. I focused on my own life during this time. The promotion I had been working toward came through, along with a significant salary increase. I started dating again, meeting Rebecca through a hiking group organized by friends. She was smart, independent, and refreshingly direct, values I had come to appreciate more deeply after recent events. When I told her about my family situation, she didn't offer platitudes or urge reconciliation. Instead, she said, "It sounds like you finally demanded the respect you deserve. That takes courage." Her understanding reinforced my confidence in the boundaries I had established. 4 months after our confrontation in my living room, I received a letter from Mom. Not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter on stationery. The formality of it suggested importance, a communication that required more thought than a quick electronic message. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and caution, unsure what to expect. The letter began without preamble. "Dear Mason, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months. Losing the house was difficult, more emotionally than practically. It represented so much of your father's and my life together, our hopes and plans. But maybe it was time to let go of that particular dream. Living with Derek has been enlightening. I love my son, but I now see aspects of his character that your father and I may have enabled over the years. His expectations of support without corresponding responsibility, his sense of entitlement to help without gratitude. I recognize these traits because I exhibited them toward you. I realize now how much we took your support for granted, how we accepted your help as our due while giving preferential treatment to Derek. The clarity of hindsight is sometimes painful. Your father and I made mistakes in how we parented both of you. We expected too much from you and too little from Derek. In trying to strengthen one son, we may have weakened the other. In trying to protect one, we may have failed to appreciate the other. I don't expect this letter to change anything between us immediately. Trust once broken isn't easily repaired. But I wanted you to know that I understand better now why you made the choice you did, and that I don't blame you for it. If you're open to it, perhaps we could meet sometime just to talk. No expectations, no requests. Just two adults finding a new way to relate to each other. With love and regret, Mom. I read the letter twice, then set it aside to process my reactions. There was a part of me that instinctively wanted to rush to reconciliation, to forgive immediately and completely, to return to some idealized version of family harmony. But I recognized that impulse as a pattern. I was trying to break the pattern of prioritizing others' needs above my own emotional health. After careful consideration, I texted Mom suggesting we meet for coffee at a neutral location the following weekend. I deliberately chose a public setting with a natural time limit, establishing boundaries even in this tentative step toward reconnection. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. The conversation was initially awkward, with long pauses and careful navigation around sensitive topics, but gradually something shifted. For perhaps the first time, we spoke to each other as adults with equal standing, not as mother and child locked in established roles. Mom shared more about her new living arrangement, including the challenges of adjusting to a smaller space and the tension that sometimes arose between her and Derek's girlfriend. She mentioned that Derek had started therapy, prompted by relationship difficulties that emerged when his girlfriend observed the dynamic between him and Mom. "He's learning some hard truths about himself," Mom said, stirring her coffee. "Truths I should have helped him face years ago." I shared a little about my promotion and my relationship with Rebecca, careful not to overshare or seek approval. This was information freely given, not validation requested. As we prepared to leave, Mom hesitated, then said, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Mason. Not just for your career success, but for having the courage to stand up for yourself even when it was difficult, even when it was against me." The words I had waited decades to hear, delivered now, when I no longer needed them desperately, but could appreciate them for what they were, a recognition of growth on both our parts. Our relationship continued to evolve over the subsequent months. We established a new pattern of occasional phone calls and monthly coffee meetings. The conversations remained primarily in the present, focusing on current experiences rather than relitigating past hurts. It wasn't the close mother-son bond some might envision, but it was honest and sustainable. Derek and I maintained a more distant relationship. We exchanged birthday texts and saw each other at occasional family gatherings, but there was no pretense of closeness. Perhaps someday that would change if he continued his journey of self-awareness, but I no longer felt responsible for managing or improving our connection. The most significant change, however, was within myself. The financial freedom that came from ending my support of the family home allowed me to fully fund my retirement accounts, build an emergency fund, and even begin saving for a down payment on a larger condo or small house. I took my first real vacation in years, traveling to Portugal with Rebecca for 2 glorious weeks of exploration and relaxation. Beyond the practical benefits, I experienced a profound shift in my sense of self-worth. By establishing clear boundaries and expecting fair treatment, I had broken the cycle of self-sacrifice that had defined much of my adult life. I learned that saying no to unreasonable expectations wasn't selfish. It was an essential act of self-respect. In the end, the inheritance that mattered wasn't the material assets my parents distributed in their will. It was the lesson I finally learned through their actions and my response, that we teach people how to treat us by what we accept, what we allow, and what we confront. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stand firmly in your worth, even when doing so disrupts comfortable patterns of behavior. Sometimes true family healing begins not with forgiveness or reconciliation, but with the courage to say, "This stops now." I know now that strength isn't measured by how much you can endure in silence, but by how clearly you can speak your truth when it matters most. And sometimes to be heard, you have to be willing to walk away from those who refuse to listen. If my story resonates with you, I hope it gives you courage to examine the boundaries in your own life. Are you being valued as you deserve? Are your contributions being acknowledged? Are you accepting treatment that diminishes rather than enhances your sense of worth? These aren't easy questions, but they're essential ones. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this story meant something to you. Remember, every time you honor your worth, you give others permission to do the same. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves out there.